Close your eyes. I want to tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was an elephant in this room, a most remarkable creature with ivory tusks that bashfully curved inward. And she, this particular pachyderm, had countless folds of wizened gray skin that felt very similar to the back of the chair in front of you. Go ahead and touch that. Mm-hmm. And she would eventually one day amble almost indiscernibly in between the aisles of the seats where you sit. Every once in a while lifting her trunk in trumpeted greeting to everybody. And you would catch almost a whiff of wet earth as she passed by. Can you see that? Can you see that? You can open your eyes. Of course you can see that. Because even though the memory of a person is not as long as that of an elephant's, it doesn't take much for us to bring to mind that which we're already familiar. Right? Whether that familiarity is based on a previous experience of maybe when you were a child you went to a zoo and you saw an elephant. Or perhaps there was a time where you were reading a children's book which featured elephants as main characters. Or maybe there was a time even where you were binge watching Animal Planet and you caught the elephant feature, I don't know, right? But no matter your experiential mode of recall, as long as you have a previous experience with an elephant, you can bring them to mind. But the part where I was asking you to project an elephant into a space where you've never seen an elephant, I don't know about you, but I've never seen elephants in a college auditorium, right? That part is the exercising of your imagination. Now, I liken the concept of the imagination to the concept of faith, which for me, when I was a young girl, my mother and father taught me that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Hoping for that which I do not see. Right? So you could just imagine as a little girl, my imagination ran wild. It was really very much a veritable field site of faith, right? Where I would envision myself traveling to far-off spaces and visiting with people who would eventually teach me ways of life I'd never before conceived. Right? And this is exactly what would happen in my life so far. After I graduated from college, I attended Cheyney University of Pennsylvania. I lived in South Africa for some time, and then I moved to Indonesia, where I worked with incredibly creative young people. Right? And even though not much has changed for me since then, I still enjoy a very good pair of overalls, clearly. Right? I still also hold on to this feeling of hoping that I can eventually experience a reality I've never before lived. Okay? So I can say really that I've probably learned quite a lot about young people, the importance of creativity, and its connectedness to the imagination, which can likely be surmised best in the words of Lev Vygotsky, who once said something to the effect of, in order to build a relatively strong foundation in a child's creativity, you need only provide him with additional experiences, broadened experiences, right? And so all things being equal, the more a child sees, the more a child hears and experiences, the greater the elements of reality, which are then added to his life. And thus, the operation of his imagination becomes stronger. But what exactly do I mean by imagination? What is this word? Well, to that we can look to Scott Barry Kaufman, who is he's a psychologist as well as the director of the Imagination Institute at the University of Pennsylvania. Kaufman says, well, the imagination is the mental representation of that which is not immediately available to our senses. It's that muscle, that thing that helps us to envision ourselves doing well on an exam, for instance, or doing poorly. Right? It's that thing that helps us to write a symphony, to choreograph a dance, to picture ourselves scoring the winning touchdown during a football game. All of these things are expressions of the imagination. And Kaufman and his team are so very intrigued by the idea of imagination that they set aside millions of dollars to the development of these psychometric tests, these measures that capture an individual's creative capacity. It measures their imagination. And they call this test the imagination quotient. Right? So you have social scientists like Lev Vygotsky and Kaufman who are saying that at its roots, the imagination is tied inextricably to creativity. Right? But also, they're saying that the imagination is also inextricably tied to one's ability to be an efficacious problem solver, and it's tied to one's ability to manifest their greatest expectations in their life. So let's tease out those two, right? So imagination is not just tied to creativity, but it's tied to one's ability to problem solve and innovate with problem issues, but then also to realize their expectations in life. So I'll share another story with you. When I was younger, not much younger, maybe mid-20s, I dated a guy who, when he was a boy, a little boy, he wished with all his might and with all his mind to become a fire truck. Like an actual fire truck. He didn't wish to become a fireman or anything like that. No, he wanted to be the vehicle, right? It's pretty ridiculous. So by the time I met him, he was not a fire truck, clearly. But he had not lost the essence of himself. He hadn't lost that yearning to want to become a fire truck. So much so that, I'll just put it this way. Anytime there was anything remotely hot going on in the relationship, let's just say he arrived very quickly to put the fire out, right? Now, that went over some of your heads, but hopefully my mother didn't catch that one. But just take my word for it. Highly imaginative people are also great problem solvers, right? On a more professional level, I met a young boy who, so I work with African-American youth in a particular southern town, and I've been asking them, well, where do you see yourself 20 years from now? And this particular boy, he's about 11 or 12, he said, well, I'm going to become president of the United States. And I'm like, yes. That declaration just completely warms my heart, because for most of his life, the only president that he has known is himself a man who is a self-identifying black man, right? So if we were to take this young boy's expectation that he is to become one day the president of the United States, if we were to retrofit it to 200 years ago, a century ago, 50 years ago, 20 years, even up until this day, there are some people who would contend that this black boy's expectation to become president is just as ridiculous as the notion of becoming a fire truck. Why is that? That is because at its roots, the imagination of our nation is inextricably tied to race, such that we can call the imagination of our nation a racial imagination. Okay? The racial imagination in this way is an individual's or an institution's awareness of the operation of race across all social dimensions, as well as their ability to creatively conceive of strategies, of innovations, of approaches, of policies and procedures to redress racial inequities throughout the social dimensions, right? At the highest level, right here, at the highest operation of the racial imagination across this spectrum, that's the critical conceiving of social justice. But where we're looking for a lot of people and a lot of institutions is here, operating at lower levels of the racial imagination such that we have racial conflict. And in schools, and I'm picking on institutions that are educational institutions because I research young people, that's where a lot of young people spend their time. In schools, low expressions of the racial imagination look like teachers who are ill-equipped or unwilling to grapple with issues of race as they come up among their students. It could look like low expressions of the racial imagination. It can look like a white man who's manhandling a little black girl in a classroom because she doesn't do what it is that he asks her to do right away. Low expressions of the racial imagination can also look like entire collegiate football teams threatening to strike because their president is not as equipped or willing to engage with them in terms of the racial discord that they experience every day, right? So now you may be sitting here, future leaders of America, and saying, well, I don't do any of that. I'm not even on the football team. My best friend is black. I don't have issues of race, right? But let me tell you something. World-class institutions if not careful, will produce world-class bigots. Now, how can we get to a point where that will not happen? It won't happen if we are aware of our racial biases. It won't happen if we have something to mirror to ourselves all the time. If it's not happening in our interpersonal relationships, we need something to bring forth imagination, to bring forth that awareness within us. So what can we bring forth? Something that Kaufman did. He called it the imagination quotient, but what I pose is a quantifying metric to raise consciousness of our racial biases. We can call it the Racial Imagination Quotient, or RIC for short. So what can RIC look like on a daily basis in a school? Well, on the elementary school level, it can look like before a child comes in the classroom, a teacher, an administrator, and the child sit down, and they talk about how the child sees themselves and other people racially, and how they feel about that. RIC can look like on the collegiate level, where students are trying to get into Vanderbilt. It could be a test that they take alongside the SAT. And we can use these data to then inform policies or innovations within the classroom to then help us to dig through these issues. Even among hiring of prospective professors or provosts or presidents, give them a RIC before you hire them. And if you think and this is the problem, people, if we don't think that each of us brings with us a racial element, a racial elephant, if you will, then I promise you, you are imagining things. Everywhere we go, even where you sit right now, you have with you an elephant attached to the bottom of your pants, I promise you. Matter of fact, everybody here in this area right here, what I want you to do is reach behind the back of your chair and tell me you're not sitting on your racial elephant. Everybody here, reach along the back of your chair and tell me you're not sitting on your racial elephant. Right here in the bottom of your seat. Hold it up if you got a racial elephant here. There you go. There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, if we're not conscious, if we don't have something to show us what it is that we're dealing with, we are prone to repeat the problems and the bad habits of our past. If you're willing to work with me, I'm willing to work with you. We can build together to get rid of these elephants. Okay? The end. Thank you.